أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. Dear students, Assalamu alaikum. It is our second meeting in connection with Pakistani English literature. Yesterday we had a very brief introduction to this special species of our English literature or the world literature, you may say. Today we are going to discuss this portion of our syllabi from examination point of view. My dear ones, there might be a single question of journal nature in the final exams of yours, in which the paper setter may ask you about some brief overview or critical view of Pakistani English literature, especially referring to the authors, the writers you people have gone through in this particular subject. Let's have a start from connecting our previous knowledge or the previous lecture of yesterday to this one of today as well. According to the late poet Tawfiq Rafat, a fair number of Pakistanis write in English. So we may point to a distinct Pakistani English literature. This statement, made back in the 1980s, has even more force today, since Pakistan came into being as a separate state out of a part of the former British India. In August 1947, there always was and has been a good presence of writers, mostly people belonging to a certain class or educational and social background, who have written and continue to write in English as their preferred means of communication of their writings, both literary, creative, etc. Indeed, over the last 20 years, this number has grown up manifold as Pakistan's dynamic, educated middle class has expanded, and so has the number of expatriate Pakistanis or the people of Pakistani origins settled in Europe, Americas, or North America who still identify themselves as a Pakistani diaspora. The people who have Pakistani origin, who have been at the forefront in popularizing Pakistani writings in English. Dear students, a renowned literary work by Dr. Tariq Rahman, namely A History of Pakistani Literature in English, covers our subject, our target subject, in a good way, although not so exclusively as it should, but it has got a very smooth, simple, and critical way of writing which can benefit every researcher of Pakistani English literature. As we have already noted in our previous attempt to trace down the history of Pakistani English literature, the origin or the beginning of this special kind of literature goes back to the British colonial times. Let's have a look at this portion. It is very important for you people to go through it with me, please. The origin of Pakistani English literature goes back to British colonial times. At that time, in the 19th century, English linguistic and literary studies were introduced in the Indian subcontinent. Now, modern day countries, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, etc., as a means of producing certain useful Indians of a certain mindset and belonging to a certain class loyal to British interests to fill up certain posts in the colonial government. Most people who have any idea about South Asian history or post colonial studies know about Lord Macaulay's infamous Minutes on Indian Education, which to all intents and purposes laid out these initial basic parameters for the study of English. As we have already discussed, the English effort or the ruler's effort to produce a certain mindset, people with a certain mindset to be their subjugated subjects and serving them like servants. This type of class, you may say the English learned class or English learning class, was very helpful in maintaining discipline, in administering the country or the land, and sorry to say, the locals were rather tools in the hands of the English. And this was a tactic, a strategy by the rulers, by the colonizers, used to subjugate these people, make them work like real servants. However, this negative approach of the English produced good results for the locals. The English language got into the bones of the locals, and good and very good literary efforts were starting to come up to the scene. Let's move to the next portion to have further uh, in-depth reading of this origin of Pakistani literature, please. As time passed by in the Indian subcontinent, as in other parts of the world, British Empire, in the 19th and 20th centuries, a process took place whereby the language of the colonizers, the British, was in a sense appropriated, used for the benefit of the people by the colonized, by the subjects. In the case of the Indian subcontinent, the earliest writings by the Indians or the locals were mostly imitative of nature for quite some time, mostly intent on copying and emulating British and Western modes and styles of writing. That too of a somewhat archaic Victorian type. However, later on, by the 1920s, British India began to develop its own literary concerns, mostly connected to the nascent freedom struggles against British colonialism, and strongly dictated by a sense of nationalism and an almost romantic spirit that spoke of inspired revolution, in the phrase of late G.F. Riaz, another Pakistani poet, that articulated for a small but vocal and political educated class or section of society their dreams for independence and freedom. Some of the earliest writers of this period, this stamp, included Chhatrapati M. A. Rashid, Raja Rao, Sarojini Naidu, Mumtaz, Shahnawaz, and others. Exceptions were also there. For example, the earliest English travelogue by Sheikh Deen Muhammad, and of course, the fine and original translations of his own Bengali writings by Sri Rabindranath Tagore are also there. By the 1940s, when writers with a more innovative approach, such as R.K. Narayan, were writing, British India was formally partitioned into two separate nation states, India and Pakistan, and surely both countries parted their ways not only on geopolitical grounds but also on cultural, literary, and every other ground, having different viewpoints, different ways of life. Now, coming to the early phase of Pakistani English literature, we find that the first 2 decades of our Pakistani English literature were not so fruitful in the sense that very few writers are to be found working in English. Okay, let's have a look at the early beginners who did their best to popularize this kind of literature in our homeland. The first 2 decades of Pakistani English writings were mostly restricted to a very small handful of writers, all of them from early elitist English medium educational backgrounds and mostly writing for a very small and limited audience. Surely it was the beginning of the country. People were not so educated. Even Urdu speaking people were to find within their own intellectual liberal circles, in many respects cut off from the larger Pakistan freedom movement and other post independence political and social issues. One noteworthy writer was scholar, writer, and diplomat Ahmad Ali, who wrote elegant prose, fiction, and poetry, and his most significant work, Twilight and Delhi, reflects an old lost world of Mughal glory. We will discuss this effort of Ahmad Ali in detail in our study of Twilight in Delhi. Later on, other writers of this period, although not really exceptional, wrote sensitively and wrote well within their limits. On writers such as Shahid Hussain, Zabun Nisa, Hamidullah, etc. But there was a special talent of Zulfikar Ghaus, whose novel The Murder of Aziz Khan caused quite some furor, and who moved to the USA, where he taught for many years and continues to write the fine fiction and poetry even now. The second phase of Pakistani English literature shows a very good development, especially in the field of poetry. Let's have a look at it. While Pakistani fiction was yet to develop and achieve any sort of viable comparison with that of the neighboring India or from other parts of the British Commonwealth, or Pakistani poetry was gradually coming into its own. Indeed, comparable to the best poetry anywhere around the globe. This was the time when the big three of Pakistani English poetry, namely Tawfiq Rafat, Daud Kamal, and Alamgir Hashmi, were in their best form and writing exceptional verse. Rafat's Arrival of the Monsoon, which was published in 1987, is probably the most important poetry collection of this time, this period, one which, in the words of several critics, established a firm Pakistani idiom in English poetry. While Professor Hashmi wrote some exceptionally fine verse and also made prodigious contribution to literary criticism and critical studies at home and abroad, other important writers were there, including our Sarah Soleri and G.F. Riaz, Kaleem Umar, etc. Dear students, during this second phase, as we have seen, poetry came to its own, but alongside poetry, some fiction writers were also doing good work, especially the era of Zaul Haq, that is called the military regime era. We find Bepsi Sidhwas like people trying effortlessly and fearlessly, surely with vigor to voice against some restrictions in Pakistani society. Then we enter into the final phase of this literary development into the 90s. The 90s saw a sudden, beautiful blooming of Pakistani English literature, which was which has since grown and evolved and expanded so much. As Pakistan's middle class has expanded and adopted English more and more as a global language of business, of their interests. Therefore, a large number of Pakistani society people from different middle class families especially started taking part in creative writing, literary process. This is something that is still going on and never newer talent is emerging all the time. Surely there is an expansion in knowledge. Now people from different stratas of life have come ahead in different fields writing in English. In this final phase of this literary movement, the contribution of the expatriate Pakistanis is noteworthy. Surely they helped popularize this new sibling and some good works were produced by them at international level, recognized by the world community. Dear students, coming to the conclusion of our discussion, we have to go through this portion. According to Professor Alamgir Hashmi, Pakistani English literature refers to literature in English that has developed and evolved in Pakistan as well as among members of the Pakistani diaspora who write in the English language. English is one of the official languages of Pakistan, as you know, along with Urdu as national language, and today it occupies an important and integral part in modern Pakistani literature. This literature, in the estimation of Dr. Tariq Rahman and other Pakistani scholars of literature, can be recognized as a distinct style or a unique English literature which has a special, unique Pakistani idiom and voice of its own, and at some level reflects the Pakistani roots and origins of the writers, even though in many cases where writers are living and writing abroad, issues of identity are frequently problematic and complex. It's however quite certain, whatever the case might be, that there is certainly a body of increasing literature written in English, recognized globally as from Pakistan or by Pakistanis or by Pakistani writers. It is also certain that this will, in years to come, remain an integral part of the vast body of literatures being written in English in South Asia, Africa, Latin America, as well as more traditional sites of production such as the UK, North America, and Australia, and flourish and provide us much to enjoy and think about it. Concluding our discussion of Pakistani English literature, we took a brief overview of this evolution and development of literary writings in Pakistan and surely abroad by Pakistani writers. Although we may not find outstanding figures, you may say we may not find any Bacons, any writers of great stature, but we will find that Pakistani English literature has got a spirit of its own. It has got a special flavor. It has now come to be called a praiseworthy effort on the part of the writers in different fields. Dear students, अपने इस आज की डिस्कशन को ख़त्म करने से पहले आपसे गुजारिश है कि इस सवाल को इम्तहानी नुक्ता नज़र से तैयार करें, कम से कम 2 बार इसको गो थ्रू करें और फिर अपने अंदाज में इसको लिख कर देखें। इस पर बेस्ड हमारी एक असाइनमेंट इंशाल्लाह जल्द अगले लेसन से पहले आप तक कन्वे कर दी जाएगी। तो आज का हमारा काम यहाँ इख्तिताम पजीर होता है। Before leaving, I am very thankful to all of you for your patience with me. May Allah shower His blessings and bounties upon all of you. Khuda Hafiz. Allah.